Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us both in person here in the Parliamentary Pavilion and also online. And I'm delighted it's day 6, it's Science and Technology and Innovation Day here at COP29. We're in the Parliamentary Pavilion. We're joined by a good friend and a leader in this field, Stuart Brocklehurst. And Stuart, you have a very long title, so I am going to refer to it here. So, of course, Stuart is a Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Business Engagement and Innovation at the University of Exeter, but also the Director of the excitingly titled Green Futures Solutions. And Stuart, you have been working with a partner of ours, but a very important parliamentary organisation called Peers for the Planet in the UK context, and have recently come out with the Parliamentarians for Climate Change report. So we're here to discuss how legislators can work much more effectively with their scientific community, either at the national level, regional, or of course international. So we invited you along to give us an example, a case study of the success that you've had with Peers for the Planet. What gave rise to it? How's it been, and what next?
So this came really from two ideas colliding together. The first was the realization that in any lawmaking body, maybe 10% perhaps of lawmakers really get climate change. They really understand it. Perhaps 10% are climate skeptics. You're never going to convince them. They're absolutely certain they're right. But there's probably 80% in the middle who may well be sympathetic, but they're really liable to misinformation. And what we found is that increasingly, as important decisions are being made, those MPs in the middle, those senators, deputies, legislators, they're getting targeted by people seeking to lead them astray, by giving them plausible sounding reports which actually would point them away from understanding how important climate change is and from taking the right action. And it's very hard when you're a lawmaker. You're bombarded with all sorts of partisan takes on things. How do you know what is truth? How do you get to a real source of understanding? Now, in another corner of the world, in the university sector, we are sometimes guilty, dare I say, of academics talking to other academics and thinking that's what matters. If I could take a parallel, my brilliant colleagues who deal with dementia research, if they discover a new drug which can alleviate the symptoms of that horrible disease, and they write a paper which gets published in the New England Journal of Medicine, they talk at conferences about it. That will help them. That will help the university. Our rankings will rise, we'll get more funding. Won't help a single person with dementia unless we actually can work with partners to get the drug tested, certified, manufactured, distributed. And the same applies with climate science. It's really important that academics working in this field take that research and work with others, be it in business, policymakers, lawmakers, so that that research can have real-world impact. So that was how this guide, the Parliamentarians' Guide to Climate Change, came about. And what we sought to do was to provide something which would be easily accessible for busy members of Parliament. So it's just got 10 chapters. Each is about 600, 700 words long. Each is written by one of the world's absolute top experts on climate change, covering different aspects. And the idea is that it makes it really quite straightforward to just digest. And then there are links at the back to a website where all the big reports from the IPCC, the CCC, the IEA, the UNFCCC, everyone else is there. So if you want to go deeper, you can. It was launched a month ago in the British Parliament. It was given to every MP and every active member of the House of Lords. Active is a relative concept when it comes to the House of Lords, but it went to those who participate strongly there. And it's already had really considerable impact. We've seen it quoted by ministers, both in the House of Commons and in the House of Lords. It's been used to rebut climate skeptics in debate. But also it's gone out to local government, to councillors across the country. We know that the boards of many of the biggest companies have sent it round to all of their directors to say, you need to understand climate change. This is something quick and easy and digestible. It's a quick way for you to understand it. The British Foreign Office has sent it out to all embassies around the world as well. And thanks to you, Melanie, of course, it's been translated now into Azerbaijani, and it looks like there'll be versions for Brazil, a version in Arabic, possibly one in Canada, one in South Korea, and I suspect we haven't seen the end of that list either. And I think this is so important to ensure that legislators around the world have access to something which is easy to digest. And what we're also seeing from the British Parliament is that it's sparked an interest in asking questions of academics. So from a debate, we had a query come through saying, someone's just quoted this figure to say climate change is a load of nonsense. How do I rebut it? And we were able to send back really quickly, well, actually, how that figure was arrived at was this, and the real information is this, and that got used, and it was so good, you know, to see that this is inspiring MPs to engage with scientists. We've had some MPs go, oh, I don't really have a good understanding, but what I'm finding is my academic colleagues are completely relaxed about that, saying that's not a problem. You know, it's just great that you want to engage. It's great that you want to understand the science. So I think we could be on the curb of something really interesting here.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the trick there really is to get the communication correct, right? So you've got politicians, because we're talking about politicians, yeah, who are professional communicators. And so we want to get something into their hands which is a trusted source. And the emphasis there is on trusted. Because you started out with the emphasis on making sure that in a world of disinformation and misinformation, where climate change has become a highly politically charged and partisan issue, that we can get the science across,
yes,
which is unfiltered, yeah, through, not mediated through a party political perspective.
Yes.
And to get it across in a way that has not been as successful through other means. I'm thinking of the IPCC's reports. Yeah, so we are now preparing for the next version, the AR7. And of course, in these reports for the last few years, there has been a recognition that you can't have all hundreds of, you know, however many pages that particular report has. You have to have a summary for policymakers. And even that summary for policymakers tends to sit on the shelf. So it's accessible only to a small professional community. So what you've done with the Parliamentarian's Guide, and we can repeat it with many other subjects, that's what we very much want to do at Globe, is you've created a very concise means of accessing the summary, but also the several levels of deeper information and data, should you choose to access it. So this is very much, you know, developing as a partnership between ourselves, because Peers for the Planet are very prominent in the UK context. We have global reach to a variety of, strictly on a cross-party basis, parliamentary organizations and networks, so we will take this forward. But looking to that future, and cognizant that we do have AR7, which is coming up next,
yes,
I think there's a real opportunity for us to do something exciting. So in a sense, this is an analog version, yes? Because this is a hard copy.
yes.
We have a print copy, the digital. But today we've really been discussing the role of new technologies in getting data out and improving understanding and confidence on how to use information which is increasingly going to be digital. It's going to require a higher level of skills and knowledge to be able to understand and interpret it. So looking to that future where you've got AI, you've got ChatGPT, you've got the various different technologies now, what would the next step look like in terms of keeping the focus on the content, but making it accessible in more creative ways to lawmakers who need it in time?
So one of the things which actually colleagues have worked on is an AI chatbot which can crawl through the IPCC reports. I think we may have an IPCC author in the corner here, actually. So can crawl through the reports of these distinguished scientists and come back with readily digestible answers. So I think using the technology to help get quick answers, that you don't have to plough through what is an incredibly important resource, the IPCC reports, but with busy lives of lawmakers, realistically, even the summary is hard for them to find time to read. but you can use it to pull back the answers to the questions you need. The idea is that it'd be sort of like having a panel of scientists on call just to ask a question immediately. So that's one really important project. I'd say, though, that I'm also concerned about risks from AI around deepfakes, etc., because it is increasingly going to be the case that you could fake Al Gore, for example, founder, of course, of Globe, saying, "Oh, it's all been a scam. I've just done it for the money," or something like that. And that can be so convincing now, the deepfakes coming through. You may have seen that in the UK, there is a recreation of a former TV interviewer called Michael Parkinson, and it's impossible to tell it apart from how he genuinely was. So we have to guard also against that new way to mislead people. And I think this comes back to lawmakers will increasingly need to know, what is my source of truth? How do I know that this is genuine, this is trustworthy, this is authoritative? And that's where Globe, where Peers for the Planet and similar organizations are so powerful as a trusted institution. And I think I'd encourage other parliaments, other lawmakers who may be watching remotely to consider what the right partner is in your country who can be trustworthy, but also sufficiently dynamic and prepared to write in human, if I can put it in those ways, because National Academies of Sciences are amazing. Some of them write in human, some don't. And so I think that's another part of what's going to be really key to making sure that we don't allow artificial intelligence to mislead those who set our laws.
Yeah, and as you were talking, I mean, I was thinking of the role that parliamentarians have, of course, which is to create the legal frameworks such that we know that technology is now racing ahead and the lawmaking is being left behind. So we have a lot of catch-up to do in terms of creating the regulatory and the legal frameworks to ensure that the deep fakes cannot proliferate. Yeah, of course we know that they're out there.
Yes.
So that is the legislative lawmaking side of things. And it is, I think, that's a job for us to continue to do with greater alacrity, because of course we are receiving so many more reports. Just in the course of the last 3 days, for example, there's been an absolute avalanche of reports on the adaptation gap, on net zero policy, etc. And lawmakers, actually most people simply don't have the time of day to keep up with that. So looking to the next generation of how we are creating that content, that trustworthy content. So let's put in the one column, we've got the regulatory work which is being done, the legal frameworks which are being created. But then it is also about how we are packaging the information in a way that it is most meaningful. So I was thinking of what we've developed now to ensure that the political process is not contaminated by misinformation. We have fact-checking. So, for example, when we have political debates, you do have now this system in many countries. You'll be having a running ticker across when a politician is speaking, you know, fact-checking in real time. So something like that kind of a system should be in place for when we have parliamentary debates. And I think that parliaments are there almost. We're like in the last mile of connectivity for many parliaments, because as a result of COVID, the majority of parliaments went online.
Yes.
You'll know that. Many parliaments were not able to meet in chambers. So there is this practice now, which has been learnt, of how to engage in online dialogue, online chambers effectively. So let's think ahead to the next conference at University of Exeter.
Yes, indeed.
And I would love for us to think through what innovations can we create in the meantime, such that when these important discussions are taking place, of course, the members of the executive are here, members of governments are here at COP. And we have, for the last 30 years, been bringing members of parliament to the COP, but it doesn't matter unless there is a hearing. A minister, a senior official, is brought before a parliamentary committee and asked to give an account of what you did in Baku, what you did in Sharm el-Sheikh, what you did in Dubai. That's as yet not the practice which is widespread. So let's try and make that practice more commonplace. and have in place a system whereby when you have an official who's telling you, well, this is what happened, here is the progress, we have in parallel a means of accessing that truth-telling. So this is really a start, but I think we're on the cusp of something which is much more dynamic, exciting. So
Yes.
your thoughts on that? And I'm happy to take any questions that there may be or contributions from the audience.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think, generally speaking, most politicians, not all, but most, go into politics because they want to make the world a better place. Now, you or I may disagree with any one individual politician's thoughts of what that means and how they achieve it, but generally across party, you do see that that is what motivates them. They also tend to be optimists. To put yourself up for election, you tend to have to believe you're going to win. And they tend to believe that it is possible for the world to be better. It'd be very hard to do that job unless you really believe that. So I think in terms of that dynamic means to engage, it's also about helping to express how climate action makes the world better for their constituents. It reduces the health problems associated with pollution. It can make the world less noisy. It can create new job opportunities. It can allow areas which have not been economically successful to thrive with the industries of tomorrow. So there are many ways, going beyond the fundamental of addressing climate change itself, that we can see this action, as well as abating the negatives, create positives. And I think that's going to be an important way that we do frame the engagement so that there is the interest in the dynamic progress with the parliamentary audience. And I think also it is about finding ways that we make it real time. To your point there, like the ticker across the screen, if somebody stands up in a debate in a parliament and says something which is a load of rubbish, but nobody has the evidence to respond, then it goes on the record. And it's quite hard to come back a week or two later and say, so 2 weeks ago you said something, I've now finally thought of a response. You have to have it there and then. And so I think it's also through the ways that organizations which bring science and lawmakers together can provide that ongoing link to academics who can give the material for parliamentarians to respond to misinformation. I think that's also going to be critically important as well.
Yeah, and you made the point about the interest of making the business case. I think that not in all parliaments do you have a highly skeptical audience. In many countries, actually, you have a largely scientifically literate policy-making community. I'm thinking of China or India.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
So you don't have that same degree of skepticism. The issue then is, well, what can we do? Why should we act on mitigation or adaptation or resilience? And who's going to finance it? So they are in different territory with a different challenge, where our interface there would be more with the private sector. So that if a member of parliament, is thinking about her constituency, and the biggest challenge is employment. How is a green growth strategy adopted by the government and expressed through the nationally determined contribution going to help her constituents? Yeah. So I think that we are at the point where we should be able to develop much more granular responses to those kind of questions through the means that we now have, which, as I said, is largely analog. It's going to digital, and it's going to go to the next level. So I would like to, invite you to speak a bit about the ambitions for the next big climate science conference, which is going to be held at Exeter in July, mid-July.
So next year, 2025, is a massive year for climate change, because we talk about net zero by 2050, and sometimes people have the notion that we can just kind of go along as we are and drop down at the last second. And in fact, I had lunch with a former British Prime Minister a couple of years ago now, who said, I think we should slow down decarbonising. We'll still get to net zero by 2050, but we don't need to do it so quickly. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't work, because every bit of carbon dioxide and its equivalents that we're pumping out into the atmosphere continues to accelerate global warming, and in turn then by accelerating global warming can trigger tipping points which run the risk of putting it outside of our control. We are aiming to halve emissions by 2030, which is a challenging goal. And this current set of NDCs, nationally defined contributions, which have just started to be published, and we're expecting them to come through by the end of February, are really critical to determine whether or not we're going to be on course to achieve that. So between February, when we see everyone's NDCs, hopefully, and November, when there's a really critical COP taking place in Belém in Brazil, this is a vital period of time, and it's a moment at which we need the science to be driving decision making. So in the middle of the year, we have the brilliant London Climate Action Week, which gets together the innovators, the entrepreneurs, people who are inventing ways to transition to the net zero future and bringing that into case. And then immediately after that, in Exeter, jointly hosted by the UK Met Office and the University of Exeter, we have a major global scientific conference on climate, but bringing together with that lawmakers, policymakers, business leaders to engage with the scientists. And the idea is that it's a slight change of pace. You come down to the Devon countryside and take a step back from this sort of constant treadwheel that we're on from place to place with summits and conferences in these windowless rooms. And you actually have a moment to breathe and to talk directly with, to hear from the world's leading climate scientists, to challenge them, to say, well, you keep on telling me this, but I can't act unless you give me that. So that we can have that dialogue, and crucially, we have it in time to feed into the pre-negotiations for COP30, because I think we all know that by the time you're actually on site, the texts are so far advanced that it's really difficult to steer things in a fundamentally different way. So it's going to be a big moment, a really important moment, and as well as political leaders, business leaders, we'll love to see lawmakers from anywhere in the world joining us there.
Indeed, and it is going to be a big moment. We need to prepare for it, however, because it's not just enough to bring that particular constituency either in person or virtually, and I hope that there will be virtual means also of engaging them, but to create that, improve their literacy about why this is important. And it's not just about learning about the climate science, it's about the solutions which are being created in academia also. So I just want to end with that focus on the other parts of your profile, which is really on the green business solutions.
Mm-hmm. So I think this comes back to taking academia out of universities, taking the research out and ensuring that it delivers practical effect. What we're finding is there is massive desire from business to act on climate change, but they don't necessarily know how or how to justify it. And I've met with the chief executives of a number of major banks and asset managers, and bluntly, you don't get to be in one of those jobs unless you're reasonably smart. And so they get it. They absolutely understand that this is an existential question. But their next question on is, if I act and it leads my share price to collapse, I will be fired the next day. My board is not going to wait around. How can I either persuade my investors that they need to accept that, or alternatively, how can I make this something which is a productive thing, which demonstrates that it's in the long-term interests of my investors to support me doing? So that engagement is actually, I'm finding, really rich and really interesting. And it enables the research to have practical effects. Because if you start to change how the financial system works in particular, you change the rules of the economy and you change practical action in the world, you change how people's lives work. But also what that does is it enables a feedback into the research process for people to understand where are the missing parts, where is it that extra information may be required to tip people over the edge into action.
And if I think of lawmakers as your clients, it is also an opportunity for them to identify exactly how and what we need the spotlight to be put on, so that universities then become a service provider for the needs for policymakers, rather than assume, well, this is how they want the information to be packaged. So that's really the focus that Globe has had. It's really identifying, well, what is the best way to present the information, to make the case, to deliver the information so it works, not just for MPs in their lawmaking roles, but in their constituency roles also. Yeah. So I'm really looking forward to our partnership. I'm looking forward to working with you to raise the awareness, interest, and capability of lawmakers around the world. We've had a number of them who've shown interest just here in the Parliamentary Pavilion and also online. We've got only 61 months left to 2030.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just a deep intake of breath because it really isn't that far away, and I think we have to raise our game, and I think we have raised our game in partnership with you. So thank you very much, Stuart.
Thank you,
And
Melanie.
thank you, everyone.